Mark had never visited this part of the galaxy before. The mining colony on the edge of human space was quiet, almost too quiet. He had been sent to repair machinery that had broken down in the extreme weather of the outer planets. But what he found was something he could never have imagined. The colony was harsh, cold, and unforgiving. Metal structures jutted into the gray sky like broken teeth, and the air smelled faintly of oil and dust. The workers were tired, moving quickly with practiced motions, their faces blank from exhaustion. Mark's boots echoed on the metal walkways as he carried his tools. He was a young human engineer, curious, careful, and always observant. He liked to notice details others ignored. Today, those details would change his life. A faint vibration in the ground made him pause. It wasn't machinery, this was something alive, something large. He followed the sound to the edge of the colony, where a massive metal cage stood isolated. Inside was a creature so tall and imposing that Mark almost stumbled backward. She was a giantess, easily 3 times the height of a normal human, with shimmering blue-green skin that reflected the dim light. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her eyes, large and intelligent, seemed to look right through him. The colony's workers were cruel. They laughed as she moved slowly in her cage, rubbing her arms where the metal bars had left marks. She had been starved and mistreated, left with barely enough food to survive. Her ribs were visible, and her movements were slow and careful. Mark watched in silence as they threw a small chunk of rations toward her. She reached for it weakly, and they laughed again, calling her names he didn't understand. His stomach turned. This was not how any living creature should be treated. He stepped closer to the cage, ignoring the warnings in his head. He had come to fix machines, not to interfere with politics or punishments, but he couldn't leave her here to starve. Carefully, he pulled out some rations from his pack. They were specially designed for long space travel, nutritious, filling, and safe for unknown species. He held one out, letting it drop near her. At first she froze, as if she didn't trust him. Then slowly she reached for the food. Her long fingers wrapped around it delicately. When she tasted it, her large eyes widened, and she looked at Mark with something that could almost be called gratitude. The workers noticed immediately.
"Hey, what are you doing?"
One of them shouted, running toward him. Mark froze for a second, then acted fast. "I'm just checking if it's safe for her," he said calmly. He hoped the guards would buy the excuse, and for now they seemed to. They grumbled but didn't stop him. Over the next hours, Mark found ways to sneak her food. Each time she watched him with sharp eyes, learning from his gestures and sounds. She was intelligent, far more than he had expected. Sometimes, she tried to mimic his movements, lifting her hands in similar motions or tilting her head when he did. Mark couldn't help but smile. It felt strange, but he was forming a bond with a being so different, so much larger than him and yet so gentle. The alien Giantess, whom Mark quietly named Lyria in his mind, began responding to him in ways the humans around her had never understood. She would move closer to the bars when he approached, lowering her massive head as if she trusted him. Sometimes she would hum softly, a sound so low and vibrating that it shook the metal around her cage. Mark didn't know what it meant, but he felt calm when he heard it. As days passed, the colony's treatment of her worsened. The workers became crueler, punishing her for tiny mistakes, reducing her already small rations. They seemed to enjoy the fear in her eyes, thinking it was a game. But Lyria did not give up. She endured it, her body strong despite the pain, her mind sharp despite the hunger. Mark realized that feeding her wasn't just an act of kindness, it was survival. She needed him, and he knew he couldn't stop helping. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Mark lingered by the cage. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, though the colony's metal structures muted most of the beauty. He held a large ration pack, carefully lifting a piece and offering it to Lyria. She stepped closer, her massive feet shaking the ground slightly. Her eyes met his, wide and unblinking, filled with something that went beyond hunger: curiosity, recognition, and trust. "You're different," Mark whispered, unsure if she could understand him. "You don't. You're not like the others." Lyria tilted her head, studying him. Then slowly she extended a long finger through the bars and touched his hand lightly. The strength in that finger was incredible, enough to crush a human's hand if she wanted, but her touch was gentle, careful. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never felt such a connection with a creature before. It was not fear, nor dominance, but something entirely new. Over the following days, he discovered more of her intelligence. She could follow simple instructions, respond to gestures, and even show signs of planning. When he left the cage after feeding her, she would watch his every movement, remembering where he went, how he moved, and when he would return. Other workers whispered about it, calling her obsessed or dangerous, but Mark could see it differently. She was aware, calculating, and incredibly loyal. The colony authorities began to notice Mark's unusual behavior. He had avoided direct confrontation so far, but someone was bound to question why he spent so much time near her cage. One day, the chief engineer approached him. "You're spending too much time here," he said sharply. "Stay focused on your work. That creature is not our concern." Mark hesitated, then nodded. "I know," he said. "But she's alive. She needs help." The engineer frowned. "Be careful. Don't get caught. Punishments are severe if someone interferes with her containment." Mark didn't answer. He knew that feeding her had already put him at risk, but he couldn't stop. That night he stayed longer, offering more rations and watching her slowly eat. Lyria seemed to relax in his presence, her massive shoulders easing, her sharp gaze softening. When he finally stood to leave, she raised one enormous hand and gently rested it on the bars near him, almost like a silent thank you. Mark felt a lump in his throat. He realized he was no longer just helping her. He was forming a connection that neither species had ever experienced before. The colony grew tense as Mark continued his visits. Workers began to whisper about the human who fed the alien giantess. Some laughed, calling him foolish. Others were suspicious, watching closely. Mark didn't mind. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the strength in her gestures, and he knew that if anyone tried to hurt her further, he would stand in their way. One night, a storm struck the colony. Heavy winds and lightning rattled the metal structures, and alarms blared. The workers scrambled to secure equipment. Mark saw Lyria shivering in her cage, her massive frame struggling against the gusts. Without thinking, he ran to her, lifting more rations and placing them carefully inside the cage. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm, her eyes wide with alarm and relief. For a moment, the storm seemed to fade, and it was just the two of them. As the storm passed, Mark realized something important. Lyria's loyalty, her focus on him, was not just because he fed her. It was because he had chosen to see her as a being, not a monster. He had given her recognition, respect, and care, and in return, she had begun to trust him entirely. By the end of Part 1, Mark understood that their connection was only the beginning. The colony authorities were suspicious, the workers were cruel, and the danger of discovery was real. But he also knew that Lyria was powerful, intelligent, and capable of incredible things. If he could protect her, if he could feed her and gain her trust fully, there was no limit to what they could achieve together. As he walked away from the cage that evening, he glanced back. Her glowing eyes followed him, unblinking, full of awareness and something else. An obsession, perhaps, but also loyalty. Mark shivered. Not from fear, but from the strange bond forming between human and giantess, between courage and trust, between two beings from entirely different worlds. He didn't yet know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain. Neither of them would forget this first connection, and neither would ever be the same again. The days following the storm were tense. Mark had to be careful. Colony authorities were starting to notice his frequent visits to Lyria's cage. The workers whispered about him, some mocking, others suspicious. But Mark did not care. He had already formed a connection with Lyria, and he knew that connection could not be broken by fear or rules. She was more than just a giantess in a cage. She was intelligent, aware, and powerful, and he had the rare chance to earn her trust. Every evening he brought food. Every evening she watched him, sometimes mimicking his movements, sometimes making soft humming sounds that vibrated through the metal cage. Her eyes followed his every step. Mark had begun to notice subtle patterns. She remembered the exact time he arrived, the gestures he made, even the way he opened the ration pack. It was more than intelligence. It was awareness and loyalty. One afternoon, while repairing a malfunctioning conveyor, Mark overheard the guards talking. They were planning experiments on her, to test her strength and endurance. The words made his stomach turn. They would hurt her. They would starve her further. He could not let that happen. He knew he had to act soon. That night he stayed longer than usual thinking. Lyria watched silently, her massive head tilted, her glowing eyes studying him. Mark realized she understood more than he had imagined. She seemed to sense his worry, his planning, and she responded with subtle gestures, her massive fingers tracing the bars, a tilt of her head, a soft hum. She was ready to trust him completely. Mark had an idea. He could free her. It would be risky, but he had the skills. He had seen weak points in the colony's security while fixing machinery, and he knew the guards' routines. He waited until the early hours of the morning, when the colony was at its quietest, and began to prepare. Lyria watched, her enormous form still in the cage, eyes reflecting the dim light as if she were aware of every step he took. When the moment came, Mark moved quickly. He unlocked the cage using a small tool he had modified, carefully avoiding alarms. The metal bars began to creak as they shifted, but he held his breath and continued. Lyria remained calm. She knew he would help her. She stretched, her massive limbs bending in ways that seemed impossible, but she made no sudden moves. Her focus was on him, not on the humans nearby. The guards spotted him at the last moment. Shouts rang out. Mark ran, barely keeping ahead of the first two guards. Behind him, Lyria moved with surprising speed. Despite her size, she was graceful, her long limbs propelling her forward with precision. The ground trembled under her feet, but she did not lose control. The guards froze for a second, shocked at the sight of such a massive creature moving with perfect coordination. Mark led her through the colony's narrow corridors, guiding her past machinery and workers. She followed silently, never making a sound that could give them away, her focus entirely on him. When one of the guards tried to block their path, she raised a massive arm and gently pushed him aside. The human was thrown back but unharmed. Lyria's power was terrifying yet controlled. Mark marveled at her restraint. As they neared the outskirts of the colony, more guards appeared. Mark's heart pounded, but he did not falter. Lyria seemed to anticipate his thoughts, using her size to create obstacles and block the guards without causing injury. Together, they moved like a single entity, human and giantess, united by trust and mutual understanding. Finally, they reached a cliff overlooking the wild terrain beyond the colony. The stars stretched across the sky in a vast display, and the wind howled, carrying the scent of untouched land. Lyria paused, her massive form silhouetted against the sky. She looked at Mark, and in her eyes he saw something new. Devotion, loyalty, and something that could almost be called obsession. She lowered her massive head, nudging him gently as if to say, "We are free now, because of you." Mark smiled, exhausted but exhilarated. "We did it," he said softly. Lyria responded with a low hum vibrating through the air. He had no words to describe what he felt. This bond, this connection between human and alien, was beyond anything he had imagined. They moved down the cliff carefully. Lyria's enormous feet left deep impressions in the soil, yet she was careful not to crush anything unnecessarily. Mark realized how intelligent she truly was. She was not just a powerful creature. She was aware, considerate, and capable of understanding him in ways no other being could. In the wild terrain, they rested. Lyria crouched beside him, her massive body forming a protective wall. Mark felt safe even though she could easily overpower anyone. She seemed to understand that he was fragile compared to her strength, yet she did not intimidate him. Her eyes followed him constantly, glowing softly in the darkness. Mark knew he had earned her trust completely. Over the next days, they traveled through forests and plains, avoiding patrols and scouts from the colony. Lyria adapted quickly, learning the terrain, finding safe places for them to rest, and even using her strength to move obstacles from their path. Mark taught her simple gestures and words, and she responded with astonishing intelligence. She could understand complex ideas and even anticipate his actions. One evening, they reached a valley with a small river. Lyria knelt beside the water, drinking carefully, her massive body bending with surprising grace. Mark set up a small camp. He prepared a meal for her, using the ration packs, and watched as she ate, her eyes never leaving him. It was clear that she had become completely loyal to him. Not out of fear, not out of dependence, but out of recognition and respect. Mark thought about the colony and the humans who had treated her cruelly. They had starved her, humiliated her, and underestimated her intelligence. But he had seen the truth. Lyria was capable of great things, and she had chosen to trust him. That trust, that bond, was more powerful than any cage, any rule, or any authority. At night, as they slept under the stars, Mark felt her presence beside him. Even in sleep, she remained vigilant, her massive body curled protectively around him. He realized that their connection was not just survival, it was companionship. In the vastness of space on a remote planet, a human and an alien giantess had formed a bond stronger than fear, stronger than cruelty, stronger than distance. The days that followed were filled with learning and understanding. Mark taught Lyria about human tools and ideas, while she taught him about her species, their strength, their intelligence, and their way of seeing the world. He learned to communicate with her without words through gestures, glances, and shared experiences. Each day their bond grew stronger. One day, while exploring a cave, they stumbled upon an ancient structure. It was clearly not human, with massive carvings and symbols that glowed faintly. Lyria examined it carefully, her massive hands tracing the patterns. Mark watched, fascinated. She seemed to understand the purpose of the place, the energy within it. Together they explored, discovering tools and artifacts left behind by her ancestors. It was a moment of connection not just between them, but with the history of her species. Mark realized something profound. Humans often underestimated themselves and other species. They had caged Lyria, thinking her power made her dangerous. But it was not just her strength, it was her intelligence, her awareness, and her capacity for loyalty. And humans, when they chose to act with courage and compassion, could inspire bonds stronger than fear. As they left the cave, Lyria stayed close to him. Her glowing eyes followed every step he took. Mark understood her completely now. Her obsession with him was not a shallow desire. It was recognition of his courage, his kindness, and his choice to see her as a being, not a monster. And in return, she had chosen to follow him, to trust him, and to protect him. They continued their journey across the planet, facing natural dangers, avoiding human patrols, and learning from one another. Every obstacle strengthened their connection. Lyria's loyalty never wavered. Her presence was constant, a reminder of what trust and courage could achieve. Mark felt a deep sense of purpose. He had saved her, yes, but she had also saved him from isolation, from fear, and from the narrow thinking of the humans around him. By the time they reached the edge of a vast forest, Mark knew that their story was only beginning. The colony could not reach them here, and the world was vast and full of possibilities. Lyria looked at him, her eyes glowing with intelligence and devotion. Mark smiled. He had found not just an ally, but a friend, a protector, and a being who would stand by him no matter what. As they disappeared into the forest, the stars above them shone brightly. For the first time, Mark felt the true meaning of connection, not just between species, but between beings who chose to trust and protect each other. He knew that together they could face anything. And in Lyria's eyes, he saw a promise, that she would follow him, protect him, and remain loyal forever. Mark had fed her, saved her, and earned her trust. And in return, he had gained a companion whose strength, intelligence, and loyalty surpassed anything he had ever known. Their journey had begun, and it would take them beyond the edges of human space, beyond the cruelty of the colony, and into a future where courage, trust, and loyalty were the greatest powers of all.